Thank you, Martha, and thank you, Victoria, for inviting me. My name is Tony Arps, and I'm the project director for the Small Business Transportation Resource Center. The acronym is SBTRC. We are under the Secretary of Transportation under the OSDBU office. Now, those of you wondering what OSDBU is, OSDBU, every federal agency has an advocate for small business, and it's the Office of Small Business Disadvantaged Utilization. And that's what my office is. We cover 4 states. We cover Oklahoma, Texas, of course, New Mexico, and we also cover Louisiana. Before I get into exactly what we do and what we're going to talk about, I'd like to get an idea of who's in the room, what brought you here, just a little bit about your company, and if you want to make some comments about what we're going to be discussing today, access to capital. Even though what we're discussing today is pretty much confined to Department of Transportation as far as the contract, we're one of the first agencies, not the first, one of the agencies that's doing this. What you may find is all the other agencies may be doing the same thing. So if you're doing work with the Department of Commerce, you may find that that may be something that's coming in the future, some type of access to capital for them. So we'll start right here. And before we get started, I'm going to pass around a form that I need from you all. And while we're doing introductions, if you would, just fill this out, and I'll start with Mr. Massey here. And if you'll just pass that around, and Mr. Massey he'll be the first to tell us a little bit about himself, his company, and all that good stuff.
I'm Mike Massey. I'm with Massey & Associates. We provide right-of-way services for acquiring right-of-way prior to road construction.
I'm Sandy Stevens. I'm the Small Business Development Coordinator at Real Estate College, and I'm here to gain this information to be able to pass on to my clients.
I'm Rashard Tortorello of Natural Gas Venture Partners, and we convert vehicle fuels to run on natural gas. I'm just here to learn and see what we can learn.
My name's Melissa Brake. I work for Oklahoma Environmental, and I'm basically here for the same time thing, to learn more about what a small business can get from it.
Hello, my name is Belkis Lane. I am with Langford Engineering, and I'm also here to learn.
My name is Corey Disney. I own Just Enough Dump Trucking in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I am here to see what access to capital is all about for a small business that's DD.
Okay.
I'm Nathan with Olivas Construction. We specialize in concrete work, federal, commercial, and I'm here to learn more than anything.
Melissa Bramlett with Westrock Construction and Renovation. We do demolition and dirt work.
Okay.
Victoria Armstrong. I am the Business Development Manager for TrueNet, a small business consulting service, and I do small business training, including programs such as this, export promotion, and government procurement.
I think you heard enough about me.
My name is Richard Lewis, with Richard Lewis Construction. We recently required an 8A program. We're just here to learn, try to find some way to get better.
Great.
Debbie Bird, White Hawk Engineering and Design. We're currently applying to the STLP program.
Okay, great. You talked to Michael, right?
I'm not sure who they have talked to.
Okay.
I've seen all of the forms, but
Okay.
I don't know the people.
Billy Wiles with Wilesbury Grassland Farm, and I'm here to learn about access to capital for DDE and small businesses.
Okay.
Heath Hedrick, Hedrick Landscape. I do landscape and irrigation, and just here to gain some knowledge.
Great. Got a good group here. Again, what we do at a little bit more about what the center does, we're pretty much a big advocate of small business. We do a lot of different training. 2 big things that we're doing now with the Small Business Transportation Resource Center is bonding and access to capital. And they go hand in hand, because the bonding program that we have, and we offered one last year actually. And one of the things about the bonding program, maybe offering again in Oklahoma, we're finding bonding and access to capital works hand in hand, because really it's about building capacity, and that's what we're trying to do. But I'm going to talk to you about the short-term lending program today. Can I have a show of hands of everyone that has a line of credit? Anyone will just tell us about what maybe a challenge they have to getting a line of credit? Yes, ma'am.
It's a dump trucking company. They're not doing loans on rolling capital.
Okay. Anyone else that or had their line taken away from them. Yes, ma'am.
Hard to pledge your receivables for, because they just don't want your receivables, they want everything else.
Okay. You gotta be careful of that. I'm glad you brought that up, because what we find too is that many times when a contractor or a company gets funding, it may be a small amount of funding, but then when they find a more friendly lending institution that's going to loan them more, they find out that the other company, the other bank institution, has everything tied up. And once you give your assets over to a bank for a particular loan, it's hard for them to let it go.
What is the name of that? They actually have a name, because that's my situation right now. I couldn't get a line of credit, so the bank gave me, what do you call it, factoring.
Okay.
I submitted an invoice.
Asset-based financing.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that.
And
Well,
I hate it.
okay.
That's why I'm here. So
Okay,
I'm trying to get out of it.
good. Well, again, as she mentioned before, once you pledge all those assets, it's almost like me taking my iPhone, Mike giving me 25 cents for it, and now Martha is going to give me a $50 loan, but I go back to Mike and say, Mike, I don't even have the 25 cents to give you back. Can I give you something else in return for it? Or if he's got my iPhone, my iPod, I say, can I take my iPhone back, Mike, and you just keep the iPod for the 25 cents so I can use it toward this loan? If Mike's a lending institution, guess what Mike's going to say? No. And that's why what I found, it's called covenants when you're signing these loan agreements. You know, we're so happy to get the loan when we go to a lending institution. Any bankers in here? No bankers, okay. Okay. We're so happy to get the money that, you know, when we apply and they call you and they say, Nathan, you got approved for $50,000. All Nathan is thinking about is how he's going to spend them funds. I mean, and he's got it all planned. He's going to sleep at night. He's finally going to sleep at night. He's going to go out to dinner that night because it's all solved. Well, when Nathan gets to the bank and when he gets ready to sign that covenant, because when you do apply for a loan, you must give them a personal financial statement with everything you own. And you can't leave anything off, because if you leave something off, that's pretty much fraud. So you have to pretty much give everything you have. So guess what the loan officer is going to do when Nathan applies and all those assets are there? Nathan may have $500,000 worth of assets and he wants $50,000, but guess what the loan officer is going to do? They're going to attach it all there, okay? So a line of credit, we have some issues like you mentioned before where someone wants to attach everything. Okay, so getting a line of credit is a real big thing. But what I want to also tell you is there's some things in the lending environment that's not going to change. Okay, financial institutions, you know, back in the day they were about servicing you, right? Now they're about selling you. It's a sales. When you go into a bank now, it's not how can we give you some money. Well, some of them do. I'm not saying they don't want to do that, but it's about a sales. They want you to make they want you to put all your assets there. And they're there to sell you. So when you go into these lending institutions, many times it's hard to determine what type of relationship you're going to have with that lending institution. You may be walking into one that, for the most part, don't even loan on your type of business. I mean, they may run away from construction. Now they're going to tell you, Melissa, we don't do construction. They're not going to really tell you that. Really, they can't. But if they have $40 million in construction loans, and they've made a decision that only $20 million will be in construction, it doesn't matter how good. You can have a 720 credit score coming in there. They're not going to give you a loan if they want to lower their exposure to construction. So we got to find those banks that are friendly and want that type of business. The Department of Transportation rolled out the short-term lending program. Now it's an asset-based product, and Melissa mentioned earlier about, not Melissa, but Ms. Lane mentioned about factoring. It's an asset-based product, but it's not factoring, okay? So let's make sure we understand it's not about factoring. I've told you a little about what we do, advocating small businesses with the Gulf region. This is the Osnabu office, and these are the different divisions, the procurement division, and all the fields office. This is where we're at. But we have all these different offices. The office that has the short-term lending is the financial assistance division. These are some of the things that the SBTRC, I talked about the bonding program, but I'm here to talk about the second thing, which is the short-term lending program. The short-term lending. The short-term lending provides you a revolving line of credit. The primary collateral is the receivables, okay? These projects can be local, they could be state, they could be federal. She mentioned earlier, Ms. Lane mentioned factoring, okay? Factoring is basically where you pledge your receivables to an entity and they loan you money on it, okay? Now, factoring can be very expensive, can't it, Ms. Lane?
It's horrible.
Okay, it could.
The way it works in my bank is after I complete a project, I have to wait 90 days to get paid. So when I complete the project, I submit my invoice to the bank. They lend me a percentage. I don't know if it's 50 or 75. And when I get paid, it goes directly to the bank, and then I get the leftover.
Okay. Now, is it a line of credit or is it actually a factoring agreement?
It's a fact.
Oh, it's a factoring, okay? Because keep in mind the difference in a line of credit is that a line of credit, the interest rate is against what you borrow, okay? So if you have like in this case, the short-term lending program, the interest rate is two points above prime, okay? With a factoring agreement, it's a straight percent of that invoice. So if it's $100,000 and it's 2%, it's $2,000 for the use of that money. So if you have payroll to make on the 3rd and you're getting this big check on the 5th, you need the money on the 3rd, right?
Correct.
So if you need that $50,000, you'll have to go ahead and pay $1,000 for it to make that payroll on the 3rd, and then this large check comes in on the 5th.
Correct.
Okay? Now, with the line of credit, of course, if you get that $50,000, you can take that $50,000 and when you use it, when you pay it back the next day when you get your check, you only pay the interest on the $50,000, okay? For 4 days, okay? As opposed to factoring, you're gonna pay the 2% if you use it for 1 hour, okay? The other thing is, with that factoring agreement, when you have an invoice, if your invoice is for $50,000, more than likely, they're gonna have it set up to where they'll give you a percent of every invoice. So if it's a $50,000 invoice and they're gonna advance you 80%, if you only need $10,000, guess what? You still gotta take the 50. If you just need $10,000, you gotta take the 50. So you need $10,000 on a $50,000 invoice. They're gonna advance you 40, and they're gonna charge you 2% of that $50,000 invoice you need. So you gotta pay $1,000, but you only need $1,000.
And if
You
they're
pay 3%?
Yeah, and actually, if they're late, then that's another percentage. So
Okay.
if my client takes longer than 90 days, then I pay a fee.
Okay.
For them being late of payment.
Exactly, so,
That is not a good deal.
no.
No,
Yeah. But you know what, the thing about it is what has happened there, and there's a lot out there, and sometimes, you know, it's kind of, I've had some contractors, I'm glad you shared that with us, because some contractors are, some are talking about they're embarrassed. A lot of them say, I'm embarrassed that I'm doing this. But I will say this, it's the cost of capital versus the cost of doing nothing. You know, that's really what it's about. If you got a payroll to make on Friday, tomorrow, your business will be shut down if you don't have that money tomorrow. So they do have their place there, okay, as far as the factoring. And then your relationship you build over time, there's some factors a little more flexible than others, but keep in mind, if you have a client that's paying you 90 days out, day 31, guess what happens? Tell about it, Ms. Lane. What happens after 31 days? They charge you again. They charge you another fee. So I didn't mean to spend a whole lot of time on factoring, but I know it's a lot out there, and
I'm not embarrassed because I want to tell everybody to not do it.
yeah.
And we've been in business for 12 years and never once needed a bank. But during the recession, we needed a bank, but we didn't have a relationship with the bank. Doesn't
Exactly.
make any sense. We've
Yeah.
never borrowed any money. So they said, well, we really never loaned you any money, so I don't know what you're gonna do. Let's try out this factoring thing.
Mhm.
And that's what happened. So
And
we thought it was
during a recession, banks tighten their lending practices.
exactly. So that's where I'm at.
And the point you make too is like many times you hear different things about somebody says access to capital, we loaning money, and I've had some people in the area, in their community, who said, well, we're a financial lending company and all this, and what it really is, that's really what it is. It almost reminds me of, I'm not sure if they still do this, about 30 years ago, you know, someone would approach you and they'd tell you about this great opportunity, and we all knew what it was going to be when we walked in the room. What was it going to be? Great opportunity to make a bunch of money. 30 years ago, they were real hot back then.
Amway.
Amway! That used to just make me mad. You know, I mean, and someone tell you about how much money, and if anybody in the Amway, I'm not knocking Amway, okay? I'm not knocking Amway. But
Buy my book for $35.
I'm not knocking Amway, okay? And great products. Let me say great products. But what really would happen is, you know, you come in there thinking, you know, I need to make more money. I want a new career change. And, you know, it gets organizations say they got room for some associates that are aggressive and really want to make it. And then when I walk in there and, you know, it's Amway, you know. And sometimes people go to those things and they don't have that much time. It may take me time to build up that organization. So it's like Amway. So again, no pun on Amway, okay? Not knocking Amway. As I mentioned, these can be local, state projects. They can be renewed up to 5 years. Incidentally, I have a PowerPoint presentation that's up here. There's a handout. Let me make sure everyone has a handout. But you can follow me from up here, but if you want to keep some notes, I do have a handout here.
I need
Oh, here you go. Do you need more? I think I had about 15. And feel free to jump in if you got any questions.
Okay, you say the primary collateral is the receivable from contracts.
Yes.
Okay, but what is the cost to us?
The cost is 2% above prime.
Okay, so say today or yesterday, whatever you remember, what was the last prime you knew?
What is prime? What is it? It's about 4 or 5%. I hadn't found out the rate on prime of late. It's real low. Money's real cheap now. Prime is real low.
Yeah, because no one has it.
Yeah, it's pretty cheap.
No,
It's pretty.
problem is everybody's, they're just not giving it out.
Yeah. It's about 2% above prime.
I was actually talking about people like us.
The state of Oklahoma got a gold star for banks lending money to small business.
Some.
Call Mrs. Fallon and you can talk to her about that.
And 2% above prime. It's 2% above prime. However, you are dealing with a bank, so there are some other fees there are some fees with it, but it's nowhere near 2% of the cost of an invoice that you may only need for 15 days. Okay, so it's still a lot cheaper. The short-term lending, the line of credit is up to $750,000, and I mentioned $750,000. If you had a contract with a transportation-related industry, whether it's federal funds, and let's say the contract was $500,000, and 3.25. See, it's real cheap. So 5.5% is what they would charge, 5.25. So if you had a contract, $500,000, $1 million contract, and your payouts on average was, let's say, $100,000, okay? You wouldn't necessarily want a $100,000 line of credit, okay? You want to get a line of credit that you feel like you need to tide you over till you get paid, till the invoice is paid. Because when you get a line of credit, you do pay for that line. So you want to be able to, when you determine that I want to go after the short-term lending program and you want a line of credit, you want to get an idea of how much you want that line for. Because you don't want a line sitting open, because banks will charge you for a line. Some of you, if you've had a line of credit before, they will also, not with this program per se, but they will take your line of credit. I had a contractor, had a line of credit with a bank, and he was doing pretty well. He had about $40,000. He went and bought a few things, and he had a $40,000 line of credit. Went into the bank, hadn't used it. Went to the bank, normally like he would normally get it, because he hadn't got any money for about 6 months. They said, then if you could you take a seat over there? And when a bank, when they tell you to take a seat, you know, that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. When they tell you, could you have a seat when you're going to get money, you know something. So they come out and they let him know, sir, your line of credit has been cut. His line of credit had been cut, and he had a $40,000 to $50,000 line of credit. His line of credit had been cut because he hadn't used it. Because keep in mind, a line of credit, they're tying that money up for you. So if they're tying that money up for Mike, that means Martha can't use it. So if Martha's not using it, I'm a loan officer, I need to make money for the bank, so I can't let someone tie the money up. So eventually, I'm gonna just go ahead and cut the line. Okay, so his line of credit was cut. So can you imagine trying to make a payroll and not having that line of credit? because he had did a lot of expenditures. It was a landscape business, and it was like in April or May. He had a lot of landscaping jobs he did, so he really needed access to that money. Fortunate enough, he was able to go around to some of his clients and explain the story to him, and they actually wrote him a check to tide him over. So even though it's $750,000, you still want an idea of what would be a line of credit you'd use. It could be used as a subcontract, on a subcontract, any tier. You could be first tier, second tier, third tier. And that's probably why some of us are here, because if we're second or third tier sub, guess what's happening to us?
We're waiting on money.
Yeah, if you're second or third tier sub, you know, it's really been an issue. But I will tell you this, a couple of things won't change. They're not gonna go into a business and make someone pay you, okay? That's not gonna happen. Now, we all understand that it's pay when paid, so it's understood that when someone's doing something for ODOT and a general contractor is paid, and ODOT pays real well, and they pay that prime contractor, and that prime contractor pays his first tier sub, and if you've already worked out agreement as a second tier sub that you'll wait for your money in 60 to 45 days, you're not going to get paid much sooner than that. Okay, if you cut your own separate agreement, regardless of when DOT released that money, you're on your own. And I don't see anything happening with DOT coming in and say, okay, ODOT, we got a third tier sub down there, say they didn't get paid on something that you paid out 3 months ago. I don't see that happening. Do you see it happening, Martha?
Well, we do have Andy Penny, who is the contract compliance officer, and he does go after the prime contractors to make sure that they do pay their subs.
On the third tier, second and third tier.
We don't deal with tiers.
That's what I'm saying. What are you? Are you a first tier, second tier?
I'm an engineer, so
Yeah.
That's professional services.
Yeah, you're in services, okay. Yeah, a lot of contractors are now second and third tier. You know, when all these big projects in Dallas, we have a lot of big construction projects, and we thought it was great. Oh, these big projects, billion-dollar projects. But guess how much a first tier subcontract is? The first tier contract is people like Zachary, Keywood, Austin. They're a sub under a larger GC, and their subcontracts are $400,000. So underneath them is maybe another larger contractor, $200,000. So you're a third tier sub, and then you may be a fourth tier sub. So when you're a fourth tier sub, you really have to be careful, and you really have to know that you're going to have the money to fund that particular job. However, with the short-term lending program, in the event once you invoice, and you've been approved for the program, once you invoice, if you feel like you're a second or third tier sub and you think it'll be 90 days, once you invoice, that invoice can be used to be advanced a line of credit, okay? There is one thing, there is an application fee. It's $150 to the participating lender. We have a number of participating lenders that does this short-term lending program. And the other thing I want to mention to you about short-term, the participating lenders, that's a little different than factoring, is that we want to position you with a traditional bank. A traditional bank whereby if you get this short-term lending line of credit, at some point in time, the bank will take you on as a regular customer. We're hoping that will happen. We have a bank out of the West Coast called East West Bank. The closest one is in Houston, okay? But they loan outside the area. They also have now allowed CDFIs, Community Development Funding Institutions, and they're micro lenders. So they now have allowed micro lenders to be a part of the program. So if there's anyone heard of Axion, Texas? I'm not sure if Axion is in here, but it's a micro lender. And there's a lot of CDFIs, we probably don't know they're CDFIs. Now, whether or not they wanted to participating lenders, we don't know. But I will say, when you borrow money from a CDFI, usually it's pretty expensive, okay? Usually it's pretty expensive, okay? So I shouldn't say pretty expensive. It's just, you know, you may be talking 15%. However, if a CDFI does this program for us, they still have to adhere to the interest rate, the prime interest rate, which you mentioned is 3.25%? 3.25%. So you can tell the rate has definitely went down. Okay, this is what you must, to qualify for this, you must be DBE 8A, Hub Zone, disabled veteran, or service disabled veteran owned. And those of you that may not fit that, if you with another agency, hopefully there will be some other things rolled out just like this, lending programs. Must have a current transportation related contract. Does anyone here currently doing anything that has federal dollars on it? 1, 2, 3, 4, okay. Must be carrying on federal taxes. And, you know, sometimes we think, well, that's should be the case, but I'm telling you, in this environment now, if you are behind on taxes, as long as you have an agreement worked out, we had a company that did have an agreement worked out. So if you do have an agreement worked out with the IRS, because once you get in trouble with them, it's hard to work out. So if you're in a workout agreement, they will work with you.
Have a direct current transportation-related contract, so you got to be a prime to ODOT.
No, no, just as long as federal dollars. If there's $1 of federal money on that contract. So if ODOT, who's the largest prime here in Texas, in Oklahoma? Who uses the largest, some of your primes? Primes? Prime? Do it. Okay, so if Do It has a contract with ODOT, and they have another sub they're subbing out to, a first-tier sub, that sub is eligible for it, as well as a third-tier sub is eligible for it. And keep in mind, one of the things you want to keep in mind, you'd be surprised the number of projects, there's federal dollars. Go ahead.
So when it says in whole or in part?
Yes,
The
yes.
part is a subcontract.
Yes. I had a hand raised.
Okay, when you say have a current transportation contract, are you saying you're under contract with ODOT, or you're under a contract, could it be a contract that you have for like the city of Tulsa? You're under contract for one of their subs that's gonna be doing some road maintenance work?
Yes, as long as there's federal dollars involved. And I'm glad you brought that up, because now there's a lot of pass-through funding, a lot of infrastructure dollars. There's a lot of money for that out there, infrastructure. And what some cities and some counties are doing, they're getting some of the money directly. And Martha probably knows a little bit more about this than I do even. But there are federal dollars that are passed through to the cities, to the counties. In fact, we have a county in Texas that they're real aggressive, and they're getting a lot of those funds. Two things, the reason why they're getting the funds. They're real aggressive with participation. They find the MWBEs, they find the small businesses, and so they're able to make those participation goals. They're also able to, unfortunately, believe it or not, there's just not a lot of money out there for highway and road construction. So this entity also has funds to go ahead and get the projects going. So that's a good question you ask about that. Eligible activities. These are some of the activities used for, but mainly it's used for working capital, payroll, and materials. It's not used for mobilization. It's not used for purchases. If you got existing debt, it's not used for that. Now, what happens once you approve with this lender, you would take this invoice to the lender and you advance these funds. Now, the lender's going to ask you, what are you going to be using these funds for, okay? So they will ask what these funds are going to be used for, and they're not going to have they're going to take it that you're using them for this. So you're not going to, I'm not sure what kind of, I don't think there's a document you sign. It's just that once they approve you for this, you take the invoice in, you're going to be using it for this. This is administered by our office. The documentation is performed by the participating lender. It takes 30 to 60 days. And when I get to this part, I always like to say it really just depends on you. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. Okay, so based on what you're saying, let's say we've been approved for this program, okay? We go out, we do the work, we submit our contractor, because I am a subcontractor.
Okay.
I submit the bill to my subcontractor. So then I then submit the bill to you. This is what they owe me.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's the invoice.
You're going to give me XYZ amount of money.
Yes.
Now, what happens if said contractor decides to file bankruptcy and you have to go after his bond? What happens here to me?
To you. Good question. Great question. Okay. Yes. What she's saying is, what happens if she takes an invoice from a contractor that goes belly up, and she's advanced this money? Are we coming after her house? The answer is no. Okay? This is backed, the federal government backs this loan. So the bank, once that company goes belly up, the bank will then file to receive the guarantee from the federal government, like an SBA loan. So no. Once you get that money, if that contractor goes under, they're not coming after you.
Is that written somewhere?
Okay,
her.
Yeah,
That's why she
because-
wants to go in.
So, okay, so they don't get their money. I submit the invoice.
To the lending institution.
The contractor goes belly up.
Mhm.
I called my banker and say, hey, you know, this loan that I have, I just got bankruptcy paperwork on this contractor. I'll bring it to you,
The lender is the one that will contact DOT
okay?
and say, we receive an invoice from this company, and this company is not paying it. So you're not even part of that. Don't even worry about that. That's,
Okay, but then what does that do to my loan?
that,
You would wanna go
no,
ahead
it doesn't-
and
it doesn't do-
file- You would wanna go ahead and file against the bankrupting company's bond. That, I don't think that alleviates
said
you
no.
from.
no. The lending institution and the federal government go after them. They've already advanced the money. They've already purchased that receivable from her. The receivable has been purchased.
I would go ahead and file.
Yeah.
Okay,
The-
but so you're saying, let's use the figures, if I have a $10,000 bill to my contractor,
Mhm.
and I go through your program,
Mhm.
are you going to advance me the full 10, or are you only gonna advance me 80%, or
They're,
how
they're,
do you decide?
they're,
what
they're
to
going, they're
advance?
going to advance you 80 to 95%, okay?
Okay.
Now, as far as who's going to go after that company, that's the federal government going after them. It's like an SBA loan.
What happens to the other 10 to 20%?
They will also go after that also for you. But so you got 10% that's going to hang out there, possibly.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll have
That
10%.
10% is always gonna count against you until it's cleared?
Now, when you say count against you, I don't understand the count against you.
have
No.
to pay it.
No, the 10% you hadn't received yet.
We haven't received the 10%
Oh,
yet.
okay. Yeah, you're out of it because you won't get it from the bankruptcy company.
Exactly. So you do have a little risk with that 5 to 10%. And keep in mind, one of the things that's going to happen too is they're going to be kind of careful with anyone that they submit, and they're going to advance that money. So the bank is not going to give that to any company. But the bank is also have that guarantee. So they're willing to take that risk.
Well,
But
I
I would-
understand that, but it's just one of those things, it's different than what, this is a different program than what you're used
Yes.
to hearing about. So it's like, okay, but what happens when this goes this way?
So when
Yes.
she submits her invoice and then the company didn't go bankrupt, they're paying you, do they send her the money or do they send it to you?
No, they send it to the lending institution.
Okay. So
She's advanced the money. East West Bank. Let's say East West Bank. What they do, they'll send it to East West Bank. Okay? Now, when the entire invoice is paid, you receive the other 10%.
so it's
So
the
it's
same
part
like
like
mine.
factoring.
It is like.
No, it's the money, but the arrangement as far as the financing is totally different. The other thing that factoring does, I don't want to talk a whole lot about factoring, but they have what they call fund administration. Anyone heard of fund administration? That's where they charge you a certain percent to administer that factor agreement. I'm not sure if you have fund administration. What they will do is they want to pay all your bills for you. Okay? They will pay the bills. Do they pay your bills for you?
No.
On that, they let you pay the bills, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what happens on that, a lot of times on that job, on that particular invoice, the factor they have a lockbox, and they'll set it up where all payments coming in comes to them, and they pay out your subs and all that. But there is a percent they charge for that. It's called fund administration. So with a factor, they make it two ways. They make it with fund administration, because they're going to take over that particular contract and pay your vendors for you. They're also going to charge you a percent. So now you're talking about, I'm thinking it's about 1%. So now you're talking about maybe 4% that you're paying on that with fund administration.
You can hire a payroll secretary for more than that.
Yeah. However, some factors, they're going to require fund administration. Now, if they ask for fund administration, be sure to say no, okay? Because they're going to ask you because they make money off that. There's some of the smaller ones that loan to contractors without a lot of capacity, like SureTech. Anybody ever heard of SureTech? Well, SureTech is one that's very popular in our area, but a lot of it is fund administration, and they make a lot of money off fund administration, in addition to the factoring fee.
I'm pretty sure mine doesn't.
Doesn't?
But where we're spending a lot of money is, it's really not that bad, the percentage fee, for what you get to make payroll. But what I found that is it costs more money for the bookkeepers, that is a nightmare. And when I get to do my taxes, our accountant charges us more because they have all these other accounts. Because apparently get their factoring, they put the money on a separate savings account. So they have to keep the books on that too. I mean, it takes.
And different, let me just say this about factoring. Different factoring companies are totally different. Years ago, I worked for Dun & Bradstreet, and I had a lot of factors were customers of mine. So a lot of factors are different. Keep in mind, it depends on how they see your industry and how they see you and what they go after. There are some factors that go after high-risk businesses, high-risk industries. Some go after industries where there's not a lot of risk. And so a lot's going to be the appetite that the factor has for your type of business, really.
Okay, I have a question. Just so I get it clear on the way that it works. Basically, there's a lending institution, bank, for SNL or whatever.
Okay.
And the short-term lending, the federal government just backs the line of credit to this institution.
Yes.
For her.
Yes.
Correct? Okay.
Yes.
Second question. ODOT, well, I wouldn't say they totally don't like it, but joint checks is not something they really jump up and down and they like. Is it dependent on the lending institution if they're going to require a joint check to be sent for the job that she's getting, right, that she's borrowed, that she's invoiced for?
No, there is a joint check component, but basically the joint check component is when you give me your invoice and I give you $40,000, let's say it's $50,000, I advance you $40,000 through the paperwork that you're signing. When that contractor sends payment to me, the lending institution, he'll have both of our names on it. You'll have both of our names on it. So it's not necessarily a joint check per se. I mean, I wouldn't use that term, joint check, because we're thinking more material suppliers and.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that's just a hoop that you would have, or to get your contractor to agree that they would send it joint.
Yeah. And she brought up a very good point. Where I'm at in North Texas, there's one district don't have a problem with joint checks. Other district frowns on it. They're right beside each other. So those are some things that it just depends on individual districts. I'm glad you brought that up. Joint check arrangements, it just varies with the different districts. Who allows joint checks? And that's something we can get into that. Go ahead.
So, when you're looking at a partnership with this so-called bank, so that you can back a loan, because we're here and we're listening to this asset program, do you have a list of lenders in Oklahoma that work with you, or would we have to go and tell our bank about you?
There's three states that do not have a participating lender. Oklahoma is one of them. The other, no, wait, let me clear that up. The other lenders will lend in Oklahoma, but there's not one located in Oklahoma. There's probably, out of the 50 states, there's probably a lender in 45 states. And at our last conference call, they mentioned they're looking for a lender in Oklahoma. And they're aggressively going after lenders, because that lender, each year is doubling. When it first started out, they had about 10 lenders. The nearest lender to us was in Denver about 4 years ago.
But, okay, so now, the next question. Are the requirements going to be the bank's requirements, or are the requirements going to be Office of the Secretary of Transportation's requirement? Because, say, my industry, right now, there's not a bank that's going to lend to a trucking
Okay,
company.
glad you brought that up. Great point, I was gonna get to that. It's not credit driven. You can pretty much have a credit score of 480. It's not credit driven. It's not credit driven. It's not credit driven. I shouldn't say 40, but it's not credit driven.
So once she submits her invoice, you send a letter to the contractor say, hey, when you make this payment, you need to send it to my office.
Yeah, the bank does all that. That's all done by the bank.
But I would suggest that if that problem, that you call the contractor and say, this is
what I've done, you're gonna get a letter from whatever.
Let me say this, the other thing, since we're talking about this, one of the things that when it comes to bonding, bonding and asset-based lending and factoring is like oil and water, okay? Because a bonding company wants all of what you have in the event they have to go after you. So bonding, in the past, bonding and factoring just don't like each other. They just don't go together, okay? With the short-term lending program, we will subordinate our position, meaning if you have a bonding company, the bonding company doesn't have to worry about if something happened. Yes, yes, yes. On this particular instrument, we will subordinate or take a second position behind the bonding company. And it's so important to, we're doing a lot of bonding in Dallas, letting the bonding companies understand and the producers understand that in the event that a contractor is a part of this program, you still have first rights to that receivable. So we will subordinate our position on that. Because you start talking factoring to a bonding company, oh, they'll just practically turn off. They don't want to hear that. But we will subordinate our position. So we'll take a second position. So the bonding company gets theirs first, and then next is the federal government, because the bank's going to get repaid. It's the federal government getting theirs back. Okay? Good questions. You asked some great questions. I mean, this has been a pretty lively, everybody usually sit back anyway. And I'm not going to go over this checklist, but basically you'll have to submit the same thing you normally have to do with a bank. Just due diligence. Got to submit the same thing. This is the checklist of all the things you have to list. But again, it's the invoice. We've had a number of these approved. It is the invoice. But you still will have to submit these things. These things will always have to submit it. And the way we work that is, we would set you up with a Dropbox, okay? Now, what a Dropbox is, it's in the cloud, so I don't want to it's in the cloud, but basically what will happen is, in the event, what's the name of your company?
Just Enough.
If Just Enough size, we want to pursue this. We're doing contracts where there's federal dollars involved. We want to do this. What I would do is set up a Dropbox with Just Enough. And what Just Enough would do is they'll start depositing all that information in there for me. I mean, I'm going to ask her, hey, you got your resume, but you don't have your cash flow projection, okay? I need that. Well, you don't have your DBA certification. You're DBE, but it's somewhere. So that Dropbox, you'll be putting all that in the Dropbox. Once we have all that, we'll submit that to DOT, saying everything looks fine for approval. Then we'll come back to you and say you've been approved for the short-term lending, and whatever lender we place you with, that's who's going to advance you the money on those receivables.
So you really don't mess with the bank. We do everything through you. Once you all approve, you then turn around and tell us who our lender is.
Yes. Now, some offices work a little different. Some offices, some of the lenders are a little more proactive. Some of the lenders have actually, when I've had some of our meetings, some of the other offices that have this lending program, some lenders have actually, they have a contract, they know about the program. So they will say, hey, Nathan, I don't mean to say Nathan, but you're in front of me, and I only have about two name tags, so I'm using your name a lot. But basically, Nathan, have you heard about this DOT? Let's say they're a short-term lender. Have you heard about this DOT program? So they may work with you to compile all this, and then they may contact one of our offices and say, one of my clients wants to be part of the short-term lending. They filled out the application. There is an application you fill out. So then they may be proactive to send it to my office, or when talking to me, I may say, hey, listen, I've set a Dropbox up for you. DOT has access to the Dropbox. Put all that information in the Dropbox so that DOT can get that, okay? So different offices work it differently. And the other thing, I'm glad you mentioned that, is it's a committee. And the committee meets, when you talk about time frame, the committee meets once a month. Now, they're saying they try to meet a little earlier, but the committee meets once a month to approve all these loans. So, if the committee meets on the 15th and your paperwork get there on the 16th, it won't be looked at till the 15th of the following month, okay? They're trying to speed that up. But again, I'm not gonna go over this entire checklist, but these are just some things banks normally ask for.
So if we're filling out paperwork here, does it go to your office in Tech, so you're in Dallas?
Yes, you'd have a Dropbox, and we just put it in a Dropbox, and yes. And what usually happens before, I'll call our contact in DC and I say, Graham, I have a Dropbox for this company, you have access to it, like everything's there? He's like, okay, it's there, so yeah, you have access to it though.
Is the short-term lending invoice driven only? In other words, if she knew she was getting ready to do a, $100,000 job and, she wanted to get like pre-approved and such?
As long as she has a
is that what you
contract.
call it?
As long as you have a contract.
So it couldn't be contract driven?
Contract driven, yes. Just as long as you have a contract. The other thing is,
I'm thinking about, you say it meets on the 15th and then her paperwork gets there the 16th and she's really needing that. She would want to, you would want, not saying you, you would
Yeah.
want to try to, if you have a contract, you would kind of want to get it contract driven and
and
get
she
it-
may get that contract on the 13th, so,
Right,
and-
and get it,
yeah, yeah.
is that
But
right?
still, for
Yeah, you're right.
something- For my industry, something like this, even if I turned the paperwork in on the 16th and they met on the 15th, 9 times out of 10, because of what tier I'm at, I'm 30 to 45 days out anyway.
No, as soon as they approve it and get it back to the lender,
I'm just saying initially to her.
oh, okay,
From when
okay.
you submit it.
And that time frame could increase. That's been some things they've mentioned, that time frame could increase. Okay? I'm not gonna, again, if anybody had any questions about this, but these are standard things on an application. And I'm gonna throw this in, for those of you that, if you get your 2 monitors, get 2 monitors, because I tell you, when all these contractors, you think there'd be a universal application, but all these contractors want these applications, and you got to fill it out. Get your 2 monitors, put them side by side, just cut and paste. You can be on the phone talking, cutting and pasting. So 2 monitors. My wife worked with 3 monitors, and I thought she was crazy. With 3 monitors, I went to her office, and they had 3 monitors. I said, "What is this?" So then she got a contract with a company, and they had 2 monitors. And I was at home, and I started using those 2 monitors. And it got to when I went back to work at my office, I didn't want to even, I'm thinking about the 2 monitors. I'd wait, and like, you know what? It's going to take me an hour to do this work. I'm going to wait till I get home and do this in 15 minutes. And I'd actually do that. Then I finally got 2 monitors. But that's just, I want to throw it into you. Get your 2 monitors. And a lot of these applications, they PDF for these contracts. They're PDFs, fillable PDFs. So cut and paste that, because I know it's frustrating. It's frustrating, all these different. We have a contractor that we had an outreach, and they had an 18-page pre-qualification form. 18 pages. Anyone have seen anything like that? Yeah. 18 pages. But it's a lot easier. But if you have all the information there for you, and you can cut and paste that, it really makes it a lot easier. You think they have a universal form, but that's not it. But I'm gonna go over again about the processing. First of all, we've done a workshop here. You are a particular borrower, we've identified you. You submit the application to us in the Dropbox. There's an application that's online application, as well as the documentation. You'd submit that to us. We would then take that, we'd give it to our office in DC. We'd find a bank that's going to take this. And when I say submit it to DC, that's this office right here. And what usually will happen is, prior to we submitting this, I'll call one of our lenders and tell them a little bit about what we're looking at, because some of the lenders want certain dollar amounts. There's one, initially they wanted only $250,000 lines of credit, but now they dropped down to $100,000. Some of the CDFIs, you're going to find them probably taking about $50,000 lines of credit. After they look it over, they tell us that, they informs us this application can be submitted to the participating lender. Once it goes to the participating lender and USDOT has approved it, it's approved. There's nothing on their end they're going to say no. They're going to say, hey, whenever you're ready to submit your invoice, submit your invoice. Or they could say the invoice is not complete, okay? And what we usually do, I will say this, it's not a first-time, one-shot deal. I have a couple of companies now. Sometimes it takes a process to get all this documentation together, especially if you hadn't applied for a loan in a while. But we work with you to get that information so you can submit it, so we can submit it to DOT. But again, the main thing is that this is not credit driven. It's a short-term line of credit.
What's
It's going up
short-term time limit?
of getting it approved.
Now, what do you guys, is it 90 days, 120 days? What is y'all's definition of short-term?
We say short-term because of the line of credit.
I understand that, but what's your definition of short-term?
90 days.
90 days, 120 days, you know, this invoice needs to be paid. If it's invoice driven, it's contract driven, okay? But at the end of the day, it's really invoice driven because we've submitted an invoice to get approved to get for the loan amount,
Okay.
okay? So you're expecting our contractor to pay you within,
No, yeah. Let me back up a minute, okay? Once you get the money, don't worry about the contractor anymore. It's not with the contractor. It's the bank and the contractor. That's not nothing with the contractor. Once
that's
you,
not necessarily true because if you're only giving us 80 to 85%, we're still got 10, 15% we're waiting on.
now, the point she just raised earlier, you're right about that 15% if that company goes bankrupt. And you're concerned about that 15%.
Are you asking me?
No, I understand you're concerned about the 15%.
Oh, I'm like,
But let me just say this, let me back up simply this one thing. Usually, I mean, they're going to do their due diligence with the contractor themselves. And if,
you're not understanding because we've got the loan, or I'm not understanding. We've got the short-term loan, 85% of it.
What is the term of that loan?
What you're saying, okay, it's a short-term loan. What are your days as a short-term loan? Is it 120 days? And at 121, we're getting a call, hey, did they mistakenly send you the check instead of sending it to us? What is your definition of a short-term loan?
the short-term loan, once you get that short-term lending, okay? When you're out of the picture, once you advance the funds, that bank has just bit that off. That's theirs. You're out of it. That's what I'm saying. You're out of it. Once that bank takes that, you're out of the loop.
But you're still holding 15% of it.
The 15%, as you mentioned earlier, that may take a while to recover that. So you do have a little risk involved with the 15%, but you're out of it.
That 15%'s not gonna come from the bank. It's gonna come from.
Litigation. I mean, there's a good chance that 15% is going to litigate.
Because if the contractor pays the bank, once the bank receives their money and they're paid their 85%, there's still 15%. They should then release the.
They will. I'm assuming you were saying that if the company goes under, you're finished. Oh yeah. You get. Oh, I'm sorry. Now I understand your question. Yeah, it's not like they'll give you money. 15% is given back to you. I thought you were talking about a scenario where the company goes under.
When you say they, is it the contractor that you billed to? or
No, the
is it
bank. The bank. The bank.
So eventually you will get 100% from the.
Yes. Oh yeah. You'll get your 100%. Okay. I'm sorry. I misunderstood what you said. I'm sorry.
So, she does this deal. The person she's working for, or pays the bank instead of her?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, well, my question goes back to her short term, because here's a perfect example. I got so excited 3 years ago, I got my first ODOT project. Yay! It's just started like last week.
Your first ODOT project?
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
So it was 3 years.
Now are you a prime contractor?
No.
Okay.
We're professional services.
Okay.
So we interviewed, we went through the whole process, and we got awarded it. It was 3 years ago. So it's just now kicking off.
Well, you know what? Government contracting, it takes time.
So it goes back to her short term. Why don't you?
Yeah, it takes time.
I didn't do it. I just put it aside, and I just pretend I didn't get it till it came back to life.
I was at a business briefing the other day, and I had someone I've been talking to, and they said, you know what? I finally, TxDOT not gonna do no business with me. I'm not talking to those people anymore. And you know what? You done wasted 4 years of trying to get in. Sometimes it just takes a while. It really does. It just takes a while, and you've invested all that.
I'm
But
excited.
you're providing professional services,
Yeah.
unlike she's providing.
Well, hers is a quicker turnaround, in my view.
Not
Yeah.
necessarily.
Not necessarily. There are people still wanting to get business with DOT. So.
Well, I mean that, but the type of work, and I have another question. I go back, is each time do you have to reapply with each invoice?
No. And that's a good question she brought up. Let's just say you're doing business with one of the primes here or one of the contractors, and your contract is with them, and you get another contract with another prime contractor, you don't have to resubmit another application.
You just submit.
Yeah, it's still good for that new DOT contract.
Okay, so when you when you submit an application, okay, and you submit a contract, and the contract is, let's say, for $100,000, and you have another contract that comes along, and
With another company or the same
with
company?
another company,
Okay.
and the contract is for $150,000. Do you have, which would require above what the original 100,000 was, would you have to reapply again?
Yeah, you have to resubmit. You have to resubmit if you want more. If you want to increase, you'd have to resubmit it again. If you want to resubmit. Now, when you say contract, we're talking about, you may have a $150 contract, but your invoices may not be $150,000. You may have smaller invoices. But your question is, if there's another contract you get and you feel like you have $50,000 in lending, line of credit, but you want that now you need $75,000, yeah, that's a different application. But given you've already went through the process, it'll probably be pretty easy to get the increase.
Now, here's my question, okay? I came in a little bit late. What is the max amount of line of credit that you all offer?
Now, $750,000, but now you don't want to take $750,000 because, I mean, $750,000, there's a very likelihood you won't want $750,000 because your invoice is not going to be $750,000. Your contract may be $750,000. You had an invoice for $750,000?
Yes, actually, right now, what I do is cable barrier, just strictly for the cable system itself. Okay, here in Oklahoma, I have a bid project today. Just the cable system itself is $506,000.
Okay.
Okay, and I did one down in Houston. Okay, that one, I ended up having to go through Bank of America to get a line of credit. And that was for $892,000. That was just strictly just material.
Okay.
Not anything else. That was just strictly my material.
Well, please excuse me. Yes, $750,000. Yeah, okay. Yeah,
So
$750,000.
that's the reason why I'm
Okay.
trying to-
Yeah, that's a big invoice. $750,000. That's a big invoice.
Right,
But
so-
that
I mean, 800
$750,000 could be multiple
Yes.
invoices,
Yes.
right?
Yes. So you'll never submit an invoice for. What's the largest invoice you submit to them? Could be 800.
800.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's just
That went
750.
directly straight to TechStop.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you can still be a part of the program. It's just the invoice may be 850, but you would only get 750. Okay. So yeah, that's yeah.
So that's
Better than nothing.
Which is better than nothing.
Yeah, that's 750. Yeah.
Better than a line of credit and factoring.
Yeah.
I went to
Sorry.
already.
Yeah.
Going back to her question, because she was saying she got awarded the contract 3 years ago. And what I was saying to her is, but she wouldn't have submitted an invoice until getting ready to kick the bucket, not kick the bucket, getting ready to start the project now.
So you had a contract for a certain dollar amount of services to provide to ODOT.
Correct.
Okay, and
Receive a notice to proceed until 3 years later.
Until now, and I got the job 3 years ago.
never had that question come up. I'm glad you asked that. So if submit a lender an invoice,
The project actually didn't start till just now.
it was just
You
delayed.
didn't get a notice of proceed to work till right
Till
now.
now.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't actually had any dollars out.
No.
Okay, that
So
you
you
know.
wouldn't have submitted an invoice.
Yeah. Or if you submitted it 3 years ago and now it's today and you need it, I don't know how they probably have you do another
But
application.
what she's saying is she's wanting to know what your short term is, because 3 years ago, she was under
That's not
contract.
short-term.
She would have submitted to you that, okay, I've got this
Mm-hmm.
contract for $400,000. You would have approved her for the work or given her the money. That's what she's asking. What is your definition?
No, we haven't given her the money.
Contract.
The contract, not the invoice. She submitted only a contract,
Yeah.
just a contract. So I would almost assume 3 years they'd probably have you reapply. I don't know. That's a good question.
My question would be is how long is the application good for once
Yeah,
it's approved?
it's good for a year.
A year.
Good for a year.
And then after a year, you have to reapply
Yes,
each
yes,
time?
yes.
Even if you have, even within that year, you still got an active invoice? You still
No,
have
if you
to reapply?
no. If you're constantly using it,
No,
there's no
she didn't
reply.
have
It's
one.
good for. She didn't have one. But that's a good question. I got to take that back and ask that question about how long will that contract can sit there? That's that line.
But you said, but it's not, it's really, the program really is invoice driven from.
Yes, yes.
You could submit a contract for pre-approval, but the money is not driven until.
Yeah, you may,
Invoice.
and good she said that, because you may submit the contract for the short-term lending, and you may not need it. I mean, who's to say you need the line of credit?
I got a question. Her scenario is one extreme. Mine would be the other extreme. Let's say that you get a contract with the DOT and they want you to start yesterday. How long does it take for you to process that application?
Okay. Okay. The worst case scenario is that you get the contract on the 14th. The loan committee meets on the 15th of every month. So it's going to, at the very least, the 15th of the next month. Yeah. Yeah. Now, if you get the contract on the 8th of the month, and we get all the paperwork in, everything is done, and we submit it to DSBU, and it can make the 15th deadline, it can be submitted. But they don't give any guarantees of if it's submitted by 12 o'clock, 72 hours before the 15th, they'll look at it and you're approved for it. Oops.
Can you submit different invoices for different contracts under the same original?
Yes, as long as there's federal dollars involved.
Well, yeah, but I mean, if he submitted an invoice for $750,000 for one job, a contract for one job, and he used, let's say, $250 for that particular job, and then he has another job that he has an invoice for $300,000, and so that would, could he submit that $300,000? Could I submit that $300,000 invoice under that same?
Yes, as long as he's within that limit.
He's within his limit.
$750,000.
Sell at 750.
Okay.
So you could have multiple invoices
Under one,
Under one.
under
Yes.
one initial.
Can you have multiple, I guess, multiple contracts with their own 750 limits?
No, just the aggregate is 750.
Total.
Total.
One-
Your company is approved for $750,000. If this contractor,
How many?
yeah, invoices.
So what would you do if you exceed 750,000? Let's say I get 2 contracts of 500,000.
You only get $750.
You just get 750,000.
Now, you get $500,000 and you have an invoice for that and they advance you on that one, you can still submit the other $500,000. They're only going to advance you a certain percent of $250.
Okay.
You probably would.
Then-
But then once
Now
it's
for the
paid,
long term.
it's free again, right?
Yes.
So, let's say you got those 2 projects completed, okay, and you need another short term. Can you apply again, or that's it?
Your max is $750.
Oh yeah, the max 750s. You can just, as long as you're under 750,
Your
it's
company,
it's rolling.
It's from what I understand from him, if I'm wrong, it's per company.
Per company.
Whether it's A, B company.
Yeah, doesn't matter.
So per company, so I can have multiples then,
Oh yeah, multiple invoices.
okay, that's,
As long as we keep it within 750.
because, like down in Texas, we got, like the project did down in Houston, it was with, crap, I can't remember the name, like,
Skanska, Zachary?
Zachary and, it was some other company. There's 2 companies that partnered together.
Okay.
Now, if there's a partnership, and I have to submit one portion of the project to one company for $750, and have, and.
They had you submit your invoice to different companies?
Yes.
They didn't form one venture?
No.
They didn't?
No.
Well, you'll still be okay.
You know,
Yeah.
You know how Zachary works.
Okay.
Partnered up to do this project because one needed the other
Right.
in order to get the project.
Right, but they didn't do a joint venture.
Okay. So when you got your contract, who is liable for payment on those services rendered?
They were Zachary was liable
Individually.
for for their portion from station such and such to station such and such. That is Zachary. And Manhattan, I think it was, or I forgot who the other company was liable from station such and such to station such and such.
Ooh, that's a billing nightmare.
And that was in the, so the contract did not define one particular entity that's,
No.
okay.
That
Interesting.
That
It was
the first
interesting.
time I ran into that. Because
That's interesting.
I was here this morning and TxDOT does that a lot with, if you're doing cable barrier and you have real good example, Potawatomi County and Oklahoma County line, okay? One company stops right there, and another company picked up. Carrying cable barriers system in the opposite direction, okay? If they were doing the project at the same time, then you have company A, company B, and you still have to turn in 2 separate invoices, but they both hire you, and it has one solid project.
Give it to the lawyers.
I got her card.
I have a question. This sounds really great, but to everything that sounds great, there's a negative. So in your opinion, what is the negative to your program?
I can't think of a negative.
Are you Amway?
I mean,
Yeah,
it sounds good, especially for someone like in my industry where
Yeah, it sounds
I have
so
rolling
good.
stock. They consider my trucks rolling stock, so they won't loan on them.
Right.
Even though, which I think is ridiculous because I'm required to keep $1 million insurance policy on my trucks. So it's not like the bank is taking out a liability if they're listed as my lien holder.
And again, one of the things you want to keep in mind is the cost you're paying for that capital versus what your margins in the job. You know, like factoring, many times what happens with those products out there is they take you guys don't have a lot of margin for work. It's competitive. So especially if you're in a situation where the factory is going to charge you 2% for 30 days, and if you don't pay the invoice in 30 days, they're going to charge you 4%?
Yeah, it's 3%.
30
It's 3% and then 4 if they don't pay.
Day 31, 32 rather, or whatever.
Pay it off and we just use another job's money to pay it off.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
So, and you're just a straight 2%
above prime.
above prime and a 150
Application fee.
application fee. Now,
And
the
there-
states that you're sending us to, do they tack on their own? Or do
There is an origination fee. There are some fees involved with that. And I want you to keep in mind when you're dealing with banks on any loans, especially I was talking about those covenants, you know, sometimes you got to walk away from something. If it's not a good deal, you have to walk away from it.
Is the rate charged on the money that I have,
Been advanced.
that only on the money that's
Yeah,
advanced, not on
advanced.
the line itself?
No, not on the line itself.
So you
Advanced.
can take and submit an application and not actually use that opportunity.
Okay, I'm glad you brought those questions up, okay? Now, all banks have what they call a line. You do pay for a line of credit if you don't use it. So you want to be careful of a line of credit. So if you say, well, I want a $100,000 line of credit and you have no use for it, there is a servicing for that line of credit if you don't use it.
But what if we want to get approved? Well, we can't get approved through you unless we're turning in an actual contract and an invoice to get the money. So we couldn't just have something
Well,
an outstanding approval with you.
Yeah,
you
good
can.
point. Well, I think what she's saying is, once the bank gives you that line of credit, you don't get the line of credit till you're ready for that invoice, okay? Okay, you want to be very careful when we start that line, when they start the line with you. Because if you start that line too early, and I gotta admit, there is a company right now that we do have a situation like that where they may be better off to go ahead and cut the line off. Because there is that money, they're parking that money, that loan officer, that money's being parked for you. Meaning he can't give to someone else, and he's not making any money for the bank. So when that line is not being used.
What scenario would that happen? Could you give a scenario? Because what I understood what she said is you go ahead and submit your contract, and it doesn't start until you submit the first invoice.
Yes.
So from that point on, you know, and say I submit another invoice a month and a half down the road.
You're approved when you open the line of credit. Okay, once you're approved with the lender, we'll determine whether or not you would get when that line starts. It's almost like somebody said they were 8A. Who's 8A? They're gone? It's like I know some 8A firms, and one of the things some 8A firms do is who's an 8A? Any more 8As? You know, you gotta be, and I know we're digressing a little bit, but you gotta be careful when you're being an 8A. You gotta know when to apply for 8A, because a lot of times firms apply for it and they're not ready to really use it. And then right when they learn how to network, when they learn how to do all that, they only have a...
The game, you're out.
Huh?
Why didn't you learn the game? You're out.
Yeah, kind of, sort of, but you gotta be careful, and you gotta know, am I ready for this? Just the fact that, hey, I can get these opportunities on these contracts being 8A, you know, you may not be time to apply for 8A. And then while you're applying for the 8A, and once you get the 8A, you have to make some plans for when you're offered the 8A program, because the failure rate for 8A is real high once companies come off of that.
The scenario would be this lady's scenario in the white, where she got the contract 3 years ago, but it actually didn't start till a month ago.
I got 2 federal contracts in February of last year, got notice to proceed a month ago, you know. So, you know, you got 9 months and
Right.
you're just hanging there. In the meantime, they're holding my bonding power.
And does any cost to mobilize? Did you mobilize in February for? Okay,
No, I
good.
didn't get notice to proceed until, you know.
Oh, the notice to proceed was,
But
okay.
in the meantime, it's holding up my bonding power, you know.
Okay.
I don't have just a whole lot of bonding power, you know. I do have some, but I don't, but you know, it holds it up. And so therefore, you know, I mean, I work as a sub too, so I can do sub, you know, but on a lot of the construction management, I have to have bonds, you know, so.
Well, I have a lot of contractors. There's some contractors that are sitting on the sidelines because no contractor goes out of business because of lack of business. Most of them go out of business because of their last customer. The job you took that you should have let the other fellow contractor take. You took the job on and it went south. So if it's just not a good job, it's just not a good job. And we're small, so we have family members working for us, we have friends working for us, we want to keep them working, but
Sometimes you gotta take those jobs though. And
Yeah.
You gotta take that risk, but without,
Stay in business, sometimes you have to.
without risk.
yeah. Well, I had a situation where a contractor was mobilizing, and he was expecting this job to start in February, it didn't start till May. Same time he's trying to keep his workforce on. That's a risk you take, but I'm gonna just say this. You might well make that decision, and you're thinking, well, if I let them go, they're my lead person, you know, I'm really gonna need them in 2 months. You're better off going ahead and making that decision, and when you're ready to mobilize, going out there and trying to find someone to work for you. Because what I find most of the time, when we do something like that, it ended up really costing us. We ended up feeding their families and our family starving. I shouldn't say it like that, but
It's the truth. It's the truth.
yeah. So if it's a business decision where you really, like he mentioned before, where you're going to do it and you've looked at all the different risk involved, fine. But sometimes I had a business one time. I had my sister, a neighbor of mine, and another gentleman that I became real close with him. And when sales were dropping, I should have cut. But you know, I'm like, okay, you know, it's slow, things, and then before you know it, you know, you lose your shirt and they still have their houses and their cars. And
And they didn't ask you if you wanna come home and take a shower.
and you're bankrupt. So, but what I would like to do though, for those that are interested in, I want to give you my card, and you know, we can talk more later about the short-term lending. But I think it's a great program, and if you have any, if there is a concern for cash flow, I think the short-term lending program. In fact, I say I'll give you my card. I'll be calling you anyway. So. About the short-term lending. What I didn't go over today was the application. I do have the application, but it's online. You go to the USDOT website and just type in short-term lending, and it will give you a PDF for the application itself if you want to look at that. But it's just an application asking about projects and things like that. So I didn't bring that for us to go over. I know we went over a little bit past 2:30, but it's an application that has all the information that most of the time your bonding company will ask for. So if you have a bond, chances are all that information on there, you can just take it straight off your bonding application.